Hey up everybody, my name's Joshua Morrison, director of Johnny Moz's Lessons in Confidence. I want to talk a little bit about the idea of the suffering artist and how the suffering artist doesn't necessarily equate to making better art. I mean, we all kind of know that. We all know that someone, just because they're going through a hard time, doesn't mean they're making better stuff, right? It does seem like common sense, but at the same time, there's a little bit in the back of our head that kind of is interested in the fact that, you know, this bit of art or whatever was made by someone who was going through a hard time. I mean, take Nirvana, for instance, right? It's probably the most go-to band for this kind of thing, right? Great band, right? But say, you know, Kurt Cobain, you know, hadn't sort of done that, right? And, you know, Nirvana was still going on now, would they still have the same legacy that they have? It almost feels a little bit disrespectful to ask that, because I hope that doesn't sound like I'm implying that I'm glad that he did it by any fucking stretch of the imagination. No, not at all. But the point I'm making is that suffering seems to, for some reason, solidify someone's art and ground it in some kind of way. And this video is kind of trying to figure out why that is. Why is it that people look to that kind of thing? Why is it that Nirvana seem to have this kind of timelessness, despite the fact that they are very clearly the product of the early 90s and late 80s, right? They were one of the foundations of the grunge scene, right? And they seem to have maintained this timelessness despite that fact. You know, by the same, look at, say, Queen as another example, right? Queen aren't known really for, you know, all the hardships they went through. I mean, what's his face? Freddie Mercury did, right? But at the same time, Queen went on for about 20 years, but no one thinks about the albums that Queen made in the early 90s, right? And why is that? What is going on there? And I'm trying to figure out what that is, because look, when I first started making these videos back in October, right, I was on one of the biggest highs of my life. I was loving life, everything was perfect, and there was nothing that could go wrong. And I say it in a few of the videos, like, I am having the best time of my life, and I do mean it, right? It blew every other experience I've ever had out the water, right? And in the past maybe month and a half, my mood has sort of been going downhill a bit. I'm not depressed or anything yet, but I'm not at that same peak of absolute euphoria, right? And I'm not noticing that the videos are getting any better. I don't think the videos are getting better as a result of it. I feel like, if anything, they're getting worse, because maybe because I'm a little bit less happy and a bit more miserable, that it's clouding my judgment of how to formulate a point, right? Maybe that's it, right? I mean, you look at, say, a novel, right, and a really good novel about, I don't know, some, like, I don't know, heroin addict or something, right? And you read it through and it feels really realistic, right? And it feels really true to life. And then you finish the novel, you're like, oh, that was brilliant. I'm gonna look up the bloke who wrote it. And then it turns out that that bloke had never taken heroin in his life, and he grew up in Fitzrovia, which is like a really posh neighbourhood in London, right? But the book was really good, and it was set on like a council estate in Essex, and it goes into, like, you know, the smack problems that people are going through and stuff like that, right? Imagine this book exists, right, and it was written by that guy that lives in Fitzrovia. Does the fact that that guy lives in Fitzrovia, comes from good wealth, never had any problems, never even touched heroin, never even saw it in real life, does that make the book worse, even though the book is very well written? And having read it as a person, right, I identified with the problems that were going on in that. Not that I'm a heroin addict, but I liked what was happening there. It was brilliant, that book. It really captivated me, and it felt realistic. And I look it up, and, you know, it's not like people are going, oh, that would never happen. So clearly this guy that lives in Fitzrovia has done his research, right? And he's clearly put a lot of time and effort and soul into trying to make this thing. But just because he doesn't come from that background, for some reason I find out that that guy lives in Fitzrovia, and I'm automatically a little bit more cynical about the book. And I bet if I go back to the book, I'm going to look at it with a bit more of a grey lens, right? And, you know, the same kind of thing could be said about, say, the Sex Pistols, right? You listen to the Sex Pistols and you're like, oh, this is one of the greatest punk bands ever, and all that kind of stuff. And then you kind of start reading into their history and how they're kind of a boy band picked together by Malcolm McLaren. They're all kind of like studio plants and that kind of thing, right? Whatever your opinions on, I actually quite like the Sex Pistols, but that's the image that they do have, and that's kind of what did happen, is that they were kind of a boy band that was kind of pitted together by a corporate entity, right? But I still like the Sex Pistols, and it's not like the fact that that was the case made the stuff that Johnny Rotten or Sid Vicious, whoever, had to say, make it mean anything less than it actually was. It's not like when they went on that interview and they were all rowdy and getting pissed and stuff, that wasn't real. It's not like when they went down the boat and went past Buckingham House and sort of said, "Oh, God save the Queen, she's not a human being, blah, blah, blah." It's not like that didn't happen all of a sudden, just because they were, industry plants. I don't see how that should impact anything. So why is it that the real world and what happens in the real world and what happens to the creators of our art, why does that have an impact on the art itself, right? Like I want to go for a controversial example, but I'm kind of scared to. So the idea of, say, Orson Scott Card, right? He wrote Ender's Game and the book that I really liked called Pathfinder, right? And I read those books and they were absolutely fantastic. And then I found out that Orson Scott Card is a raging homophobe, right? And I went back to the books and I was reading them. And it's not like there's like random bits of homophobia in the books, at least the ones that I read. But at the same time, there was this little, like, I'm decent at separating the art from the artist, right? But at the same time, there was this slight kind of, like as if I'm supporting something or someone that does bad. All I could think when I was reading through Ender's Game for the second time was seeing Orson Scott Card with a "kill the gays" sign above his desk as he's sit there writing this book, and his wife comes in with a cup of tea and goes, "Oh, Orson, how's it going?" And he goes, "Oh, very lovely, dear. I've nearly finished my new work, Ender's Game." It's like, yeah. And then there's this big "kill the gays" sign above it, right? And then neither of them are saying "kill the gays." Neither of them are talking about gays. Gayness isn't coming into the equation, right? But there's just this sign there, just sitting there, whilst Orson Scott Card is writing his bloody book, right? And I know it's kind of stupid, right? But at the same time, it is impactful. Like who created the bit of work is important to the work itself. Like, I don't know, Pink Floyd, Syd Barrett sort of era Pink Floyd, right? That wouldn't be able to be what it is if it was anyone else other than Syd Barrett, right? So obviously the fact that Syd Barrett made it is important to the work itself. Say we found out something awful about Syd Barrett after the fact, right? Something really, really horrible and nasty, right? That essence of Syd Barrett is in that music, right? Which means that badness that we might have found out about after the fact was also in that music, and it was in that music the entire time. We just didn't see it. Or maybe that's not the case at all, because I am decent at separating the art from the artist, I mean, like, there's a Gary Glitter song I like, Rock and Roll Part 2, right? It's a good song. I'm sorry, it is. What do you want me to do about it? I can't not like it when I listen to it because I like the song. It's not my fault, right? But at the same time, it does frustrate me that, one, obviously that it was a horrible piece of shit. That's a bit irritating, but it's irritating that the art that you like my aunt, for instance, she loved Gary Glitter, and then, so it kind of wrecked her when this sort of thing came out. It was like, oh God, no. So, it's just sort of irritating, that sort of idea. And getting back to, because that's one aspect of it, right? In terms of the relationship between the art and the artist, right? Like, we all talk about the death of the artist, right? And basically what the death of the artist is, in a very simple, loose and inaccurate way, is basically, you've got a bit of art, right, and the person made it. You need to forget about the person who made it. They don't matter anymore, right? You're never going to meet Shakespeare. You're only ever going to read his books. So who Shakespeare is irrelevant, doesn't matter, right? He might as well be dead. Well, he is dead. He might as well never existed and just let the books puff into the air, right? So that's kind of a very shit and, bad explanation of what the death of the artist is. But that's kind of where this is coming from, right? In terms of the suffering of an artist and how that kind of impacts the work that they do, right? So getting back to when I was in a really happy place and I was making these videos and I was loving these videos, and there's a few of these videos that I think that are really going to hold up to the test of time, that I'm genuinely proud of, right? And now I'm not quite as happy, so surely, you think of a true artist as like, and you see someone with a story to tell. How do they get a story to tell? It's because they had to go through hardships. Well, I'm going through hardships at the moment, right? So why isn't that translating into better videos for use? I don't know the answer to that, and I'd like to figure out the answer, please, because it's just a little bit frustrating because I want to make better videos. And you know, when I think of you know, an artist who has something to say and stuff like that, you know, I think to the likes of Hunter S. Thompson or Charles Bukowski and that kind of thing, or Jack Kerouac, and they're clearly people with storied lives where they went and did stuff and they got out into the world and they experienced cool stuff, right? Because if you don't do that, if you're a recluse, and there's all you can really portray in an accurate and true to life and, you know, dignified manner is that state of isolation, right? Which is kind of one note, right? Once you've written the book about that, there's not, you know, what? Oh, there's a bloke who's isolated in a desert. Oh, there's a bloke who's isolated in a room. Oh, there's a bloke who's isolated on an airplane. Oh, there's a bloke that's isolated in the back of a taxi. There's only so many times you can do that, right? So you need other people. So obviously to get that, you need to go out into the world and collect stories and stuff, right? That's very important as a, you know, someone who wants to make stuff. It's very important to get out there and go outside your comfort zone and try and find things that aren't necessarily you, because you can incorporate them into who you are, right? And I'm trying to figure out how I can make better videos, right? Because I mean, I don't want to be like suffering. I don't want to be miserable, right? I want to be happy. But then I think about, say, Eminem, for instance, right? He had a lot of, you know, hardship in his time. Came from a much, you know, rougher background than, let's say, myself, right? You know, Detroit in the 90s. I wouldn't have wanted to grow up there, right? And you know, he was only the only real white guy that was out in these rap circles and all that. So he's already got odds stacked against him. And he comes out with some killer music. He gets super famous, right? And he keeps making this stuff, right? And you know, he's got drug problems, marital problems, kid problems, blah blah blah, right? And so he's making really good music, right? But then he goes sober. He's got all the money in the world. His kids grow up to be decent human beings. So what's there left for him to rap about, you know? So that's why I've just not really bothered with any of his music. Like, I liked The Ringer off Kamikaze, and I think that's it. There was one song off of Music to Be Murdered By. I think it was about, like, a more recent version of 9/11. I can't remember what it was. That was okay. It was a bit slow. A lot of his stuff's a bit slow and sort of melancholic now. But anyway. A point I'm making is that because now he has everything, he lives in a lovely mansion, you know, and you know, he's got money, he's sober all the time, he's not going through mental struggles the way he used to. Not that I know him personally, but I imagine he's in a much happier place now compared to the past, to which I respect him greatly for being able to lift himself out of a miserable position and put himself into a good one, right? Life isn't about just making art and being as miserable as possible so you can make as much art as possible, right? It's about trying to live as fulfilling a life as possible. And if he's doing that, then fuck the music. Who gives a shit if Music to Be Murdered By isn't all that great? Who gives a shit, right? What's important is that he's a happier person as a result of it, right? The music did what it needed to do and he's accomplished his goals. Let him be, right? So that's kind of what I'm still trying to figure out, right? Is how can I become Eminem in that regard? How can I become happy in that sort of way? Even if it means letting the stuff suffer, right? Actually, no, not still letting the stuff suffer. How can I get happier? Because obviously when I'm happy, I seem to make the best stuff, because when I was the happiest I've ever been, I made the most good stuff that I've ever made, right? So in my head, there is a clear correlation between happiness and making good stuff, right? If I look back into my past, right, the year 2022, I was extremely, extremely unhappy. I wouldn't use the word depressed because I don't want to, because it's not clinical. Like, I wasn't like diagnosed depressed or anything, but I was very unhappy, right? And what did I make in 2022? A load of garbage. Didn't make anything of any worth. And you know, there's this idea, this romanticization of, you know, the author sat at his typewriter, smoking a cigar and drinking whiskey straight from the bottle, right? Going, oh God, you know, he's on the verge of suicide and everything's going like really, really wrong for him. And he just keeps typing away and he locks himself in and he isolates himself so he can get this thing done. And he comes out of his magnum opus, right? What's the lad, the Mother, exclamation mark, the film. Apparently the guy like shut himself in a room for a week straight, went half insane and wrote the film. Good for him. It clearly is an interesting way of working, but I don't think that the art necessarily would be any better if he'd just written it in a healthy way, you know, if he'd done it at a reasonable pace rather than trying to force himself and do, like, you know, starve himself and stuff. I think he just lived off whiskey for that entire time. So he's obviously got the same romanticization of, you know, the artist that I do, right? But at the same time, I think it's an unhealthy romance. It's rose-tinted glasses, because you take them off and you see that guy that's typing at the typewriter, drinking whiskey straight from the bottle and smoking a cigar, right? The cigar's going to give him lung cancer after a certain point. His kidneys are going to go from the whiskey, right? And the book's going to come out. And sure, it's a good book, right? But the lad's sitting there with lung cancer and kidney failures, right? He's only about 53. What are we going to do about that? Oh, we'll let him die. He wrote the book, whatever. Let him get on with it. Well, he's not going to, well, now he can't write another one. Why couldn't he have just written it in a healthy way? Why is it that you can't write a brilliant piece of literature, sat in a coffee shop, drinking a nice latte and, like, I don't know, having some orange juice? You can. There's no one that says you can't, right? But there's these little images of what an artist is in our heads, right? Maybe it's just in my head and this is an incredibly pretentious video, but I think there is that. And I'm sure it's not just me, because, you know, we've got so many artists and like, you know, films that try and play into that struggling artist sort of thing. You know, 2012, for instance, with John Cusack, I don't know why that's the example I go to, but he, you know, it introduces him and he's lying there like this, all hungover and stuff, whiskey bottle in hand, and then he gets up and he knocks all his memoirs or whatever onto the floor and he's trying to pick them up, and his ex-wife has his kids come over and see him and stuff. And it's like, what, could those memoirs not have been written if John Cusack was in a happy, loving, fulfilling marriage? It's not like that subplot was super crucial to the film anyway. It was already fucking 3 hours long, that film. We had to fill up some time, obviously. But anyway, I feel like that's kind of all I have to say. I don't feel like I'm going to come to any groundbreaking conclusion here. I don't feel like any kind of epiphany's coming. I feel like this is just an exploration into the idea of a struggling artist and just kind of demystifying it, decoding it, and trying to get the point across that it's not vital to have some kind of depression or whatever. And it doesn't make you a better artist if you're depressed, and it doesn't make you a worse artist if you feel good about yourself. You can feel the way that you want to feel. There is no illegitimate way to feel, right? There's healthy ways and there's unhealthy ways, but they are all legitimate. And no matter what your brain might say to you, you're doing okay and your brain is okay, right? Ish. I don't know, maybe that's not so much true. But you get the point I'm making anyway, right? So yeah, that's going to be the video. Leave your comments below about the idea, what you think of the struggling artist. Did you think this video was a load of pish, or did you think there's actually a decent point in there somewhere? And if so, what was that decent point? I think there's got to be something to be said about the idea that, you know, making good stuff doesn't require you to be unhappy, right? Because it sounds obvious, right? And you know, a lot of us would go and say that, you know, and we wouldn't sort of big up this idea that you need to be some kind of depressive to make stuff. But I feel like subconsciously at the back of our heads, there's that little niggling voice that's like, God, look at, you know, Charles Bukowski, he was a miserable sod, and look at his books, they were good. Look at, I don't know, whoever that's a miserable sod and came out with some good stuff. You want, you know, if a book was written in a mansion, does it make it less of a good book? Yeah, that's basically the video. So answer that question in the comments. And thank you very much for watching, everybody. Take care and bye-bye.